Once you enter into awakening, you can expect to go through a series of stages. Although I describe the stages of the awakening process in the order that they commonly appear in, it's important to note that people have very different experiences and that we can be in multiple stages at the same time. In fact, there are often parts of us in earlier stages of the awakening process, while other parts are in later stages of the process. Still, I find this overview to be helpful for understanding what's going on as you progress. Stage 1: Emotional Purging. In the early part of awakening, it's common to go through a series of intense emotional upheavals. Much of the psychological material that you have spent your life avoiding now comes into awareness. We may sob heavily for months as we finally acknowledge, experience, and express whatever pain is still with us. Although we may feel depressed, this experience is generally more tumultuous than regular depression. Everything we have repressed, suppressed, or avoided is now in view, so it can kind of feel like emotional vomiting. It feels terrible, but the catharsis of getting that gunk out of us is welcomed. We sense that our pain is necessary and that we are on the right track. Once the emotional purge has nearly exhausted itself, many of us will find that there is one last straw, one last thing to see and let go of before we can move forward into the next phase of awakening. According to O'Fallon, this last straw involves witnessing a projection happening in the moment. Interestingly, this is exactly what I experienced. My emotional purge involves sobbing almost every day for 5 months. One day, I got in a big fight with my husband. I thought he was completely in the wrong. But he said something that clicked, and suddenly awareness turned back on me. I then saw that I was projecting my own pain onto him. He hadn't done anything wrong. I then cried intensely, but this cry was different. It was as if I was watching myself cry rather than being the crier, and everything changed after that. Stage 2: The arising of witnessing awareness. This new ability to view our own experiences from outside ourselves is often called witnessing awareness, witnessing consciousness, or just the witness. All of our psychological experiences, things like concepts, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, social experiences, and physical experiences, can be observed by our witnessing awareness. And the more our witnessing awareness observes all of these psychological experiences, the more they dissolve. Prior to activating the witnessing awareness, we feel like we are actively exerting effort or doing the work to resolve our deepest issues. When we begin to identify with the witnessing awareness, we begin to feel like we're in flow or part of a receptive process. It may feel to us like experience is having us, rather than us having experience. Or it might start to feel like we're watching all of our internal and external experiences like a movie. We may even experience perceptual differences. That is, the external world can start to look like an IMAX movie, HD television, or video game. This is because we are beginning to view life from the perspective of the witnessing awareness, rather than the perspective of our self-concept. Stage 3: The fullness stage. Shortly after the emergence of the witnessing awareness, most of us will enter the fullness phase. This is sort of like a honeymoon phase, which is sometimes called illumination. During this phase, life feels full of experiences of joy, bliss, connection, gratitude, completeness, unity, and synchronicity. Often we will feel experiences of rapture, goosebumps, exhilaration, and happiness unlike anything we've ever known. We may also describe this as the I am everything experience. We feel we are both free and yet connected to everything simultaneously. Although we may not notice it while in this phase, we may later realize that our sense of self, or self-concept, is less active or taking up less mental space during this phase. For some reason, we are less attached to the burdens and responsibilities of a self. This often feels like a huge relief. We finally feel okay just as we are. This stage may last months or even years. Some of us can begin to think we're enlightened because we are truly happy. But this phase is still made up of conceptual experiences, things like joy, bliss, and other wonderful but temporary experiences. Permanent, unshakable well-being can never be found in experience because experience itself is not permanent. Even though we are awakening, we are not yet fully awake or liberated. Still, this glimpse shows us what is possible, and it serves as a guiding light throughout the rest of the awakening process. Stage 4, the emptiness stage. If we continue moving forward, the fullness stage is generally followed by an emptiness stage. All the joyful, connected experiences vanish, and we often experience the deep suffering of separation and loss. We're still in flow, that is, we don't feel like we're in control, but the peaceful, beautiful stream that we were just in turns into a rocky, raging river. Instead of feeling completely full and connected with life, we now feel completely empty and disconnected from life. We may also describe this as the I am nothing experience. During this stage, we may begin to witness ourselves clinging to experiences, losing our grip on these experiences, and then suffering from the loss of these experiences over and over again. We might also have strange bodily experiences. For example, it may feel like our physical body is nothing, or the body may suddenly develop weird pains or twitching. These are common, albeit bizarre, experiences that often occur throughout early awakening. During this stage, we also begin to experience fundamental suffering. Prior to awakening, it looked like suffering was caused by particular experiences. For example, things like lack of pleasure, belonging, agency, achievement, etc. In those earlier developmental stages, bad circumstances seemed to create suffering. But now, with our witnessing awareness, we are able to see that it's actually our mental processes that create suffering. I refer to this experience as fundamental suffering. It turns out that particular experiences aren't actually bothersome. What's bothersome is when our mind is constantly trying to push and pull on these experiences. For example, something happens in our life, then the mind uses its concepts to label the situation as good or bad. If the situation is labeled as bad, then the mind resists or tries to push it away. This resistance or pushing away is what actually feels bad. If the situation is labeled as good, then the mind attaches or clings to it and tries to pull it closer. Because no experience is permanent, the good situation eventually ends. So the clinging or pulling in of something that can never last also feels bad. As we continue to witness this parade of horribles, we slowly gain clarity about what actually causes suffering in the first place. We eventually discover that suffering arises from 3 overlapping mental experiences. The first experience that causes suffering is aversion or unsatisfactoriness. Aversion refers to the concepts, beliefs, thoughts, and emotions that dislike aspects of experience. Concepts that define things like should or good create beliefs about how things should be, which lead to negative thoughts and emotions when things are not how they should be, and actions that push these experiences away. Aversive experiences are near constant, making an appearance hundreds of times every day. For example, we might have thoughts like, I don't like this outcome. I don't like this experience. I don't like this emotion. I don't like this social interaction. Or I don't like this bodily sensation. With our witnessing awareness, we observe this happening in real time. We finally understand how much pain we and others live with on a daily basis. The second experience that causes suffering is attachment or wanting. Attachment refers to the concepts, beliefs, thoughts, and emotions that want certain aspects of experience. Concepts that define things like deserve or desire create beliefs about what we want, thoughts and emotions related to striving or seeking, and clingy behaviors. These types of experiences generally occur hundreds of times per day. For example, we might have thoughts like, I want this outcome. I want this experience. I want this emotion. I want this social interaction. Or I want this bodily sensation. Again, our witnessing awareness observes this happening in real time. This observation teaches us that wanting leads to just as much pain as not wanting. In other words, push and pull are equally painful. The third experience that causes suffering is our self-concept or identity. The self-concept refers to the concepts, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and experiences that we are identified with. Our belief that we are a self and that our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and experiences are what we are is the primary driver of both attachment and aversion. In other words, it is the self or the I that likes and dislikes things. For example, we might think, I don't like this outcome because it makes me feel insignificant. I don't like this social interaction because it makes me feel angry. I want this experience because it makes me feel happy. Or I want this outcome because it makes me feel worthy. After we have observed this process for a while, we'll begin to see that it is actually the self, i.e. the self-concept, that is the main problem. In other words, self equals suffering. The self is the one attaching and avoiding, pushing and pulling. This realization also leads us to realize that no self equals no suffering. It is at this point in the awakening process that the self-concept really begins to dissolve. As we continue to observe fundamental suffering and the self that creates it, we begin to let go of all 3 processes a little bit at a time. Every time the mind tricks us into wanting or not wanting, we witness ourselves suffer. At a certain point, it just becomes totally obvious that it's not worth it. Although our minds will try to keep pushing and pulling for a while, the mind learns to return to presence more and more quickly, eventually abandoning both attachment and aversion. As this process gains momentum, we often experience a pronounced dip in motivation. It turns out that wanting and not wanting drove the majority of our behavior. At this point, we might find it difficult to work, hard to engage in social interactions, and even boring to do many of the things we used to enjoy. During this phase, I stopped exercising, responding to unnecessary emails, and even going on vacations. It turns out that these behaviors were being driven by either attachment or aversion. Stage 5, the roller coaster stage. At some point in this process, we'll begin to understand that the fullness phase and the emptiness phase are two sides of the same coin. Emptiness cannot exist without fullness, and fullness cannot exist without emptiness. Although the fullness phase is a lot more enjoyable than the emptiness phase, we begin to value both experiences because we learn so much from both of them. This realization makes the rest of the awakening process a bit easier to tolerate. Our painful moments may be just as painful as before, but we know intuitively that experiencing this pain is necessary because it is helping us progress. We might also begin to again experience occasional moments of fullness. It's like we're bouncing back and forth between emptiness and fullness, at times experiencing the highest highs, and at other times experiencing the lowest lows. All of this appears to be happening effortlessly. We don't need to exert or force ourselves to witness any of this. Witnessing just happens. So there is no need to force ourselves to witness every little thing. Rather, just remaining as open and aware as possible to whatever comes ensures that we see what we need to see. Eventually, we can clearly see that all experiences are empty, both the highs and the lows. In other words, there is no well-being or ill-being in any experience. It is our attachment and aversion to experience that causes all suffering. This becomes so clear that our minds cannot deny it anymore. As a result, the mind becomes disenchanted with all of life's experiences and lets go even further. By this point, the frantic, terrified mind has settled down. Rather than throwing massive temper tantrums, it simply broods in the corner of awareness. It will still throw negative thoughts out from time to time, but it has already lost this game, and it is only a matter of time before we see through it completely. Over time, we'll start to notice some things that used to get us really upset don't bother us as much. Other things may still bother us, but we simply do our best to acknowledge, experience, and accept these things. And as a result, there is less and less that can upset us. Stage 6, dissolution of the self-concept. At some point, we'll likely notice that our self-concept has weakened significantly. We may still feel like a separate self. We likely still have a few sticky aspects of self-concept that we are attached to, but the belief that we are a separate self is gone. It's only a matter of time until the dissolution of our belief in a self-concept works its way into our thoughts, emotions, actions, and experiences. When we no longer believe that we are a self, everything in our life looks different. If there is no self, then we don't have to feel guilty for doing what feels right. We don't have to worry about the future. We don't have to make decisions, and we don't even need to keep ourselves safe and protected. These insights prepare us for the shift when we go from understanding the idea of no self intellectually to knowing it experientially. As our witnessing awareness observes more and more subtle experiences, the mind will throw everything it can into awareness, trying to maintain its power and supremacy. Many of us will have to witness all of our old fears and see through them one at a time. These fears are ultimately not real. They are just concepts created by the mind. So as we get closer and closer to letting go of the self-concept, the mind throws up bigger and bigger roadblocks until it reaches the last ones. Existential fear, or the fear of annihilation or oblivion, is one of those. As we approach our own existential fear, it might almost feel like our physical body is being sucked into terror. Most of us will resist and back away, perhaps a few times, not wanting to be sucked into oblivion. Once we fully surrender to our own existential terror, once we acknowledge and experience it, we will have experiential knowing that fear was all in our minds. What we once thought to be the great and powerful Oz was nothing more than a little old man pulling strings. As a result, fear can never trick us the way it used to, and we begin to let it go completely. Beyond existential fear, we have an even deeper understanding of how the mind tricks us. Our entire lives, we were afraid of fear, and for what? It's nothing more than a thought. Making it through this fear creates a previously unimaginable level of openness and acceptance. Even though we continued forward in the earlier awakening stages, we likely did so begrudgingly. Now, rather than constantly turning away from painful experiences, we turn towards them. We don't want to look away anymore. It's the looking away that is the problem. Because we are now so surrendered to our experiences, negative emotions don't feel quite so bad anymore, and sometimes they even feel good. We may continue to face deeper and deeper emotions, but we are now experiencing them as pure sensations. Eventually, we'll be able to feel the fundamental sense of separation from others. This can feel like emptiness, numbness, or loneliness. In the body, it may feel like a contraction or a feeling of holding the self together. To move forward, we just have to be present and give these sensations the attention that they desire. Stage 7, the equanimity stage. If we are lucky, we move through the awakening process in a few years. If we've made it to this point, we've passively experienced both fullness and emptiness, and then teeter-tottered back and forth between these experiences. If we continue to progress, we will at some point begin to realize that because emptiness and fullness are two sides of the same coin, they are ultimately the same thing. For example, when our experiences feel like they have become completely empty, they can be completely filled. So in a way, these are the same thing. This may sound paradoxical, and it is, but at this point, opposing poles of experience begin to merge. Positive experiences and negative experiences begin to look the same. Pleasant and unpleasant emotions start to feel the same. Internal sensations and external perceptions seem the same. Without our mind constantly labeling and conceptualizing everything, we begin to experience life as it is. And fundamental suffering, which was woven into the fabric of the self, begins to fall away. What's after the stages of awakening? After moving through the 7 stages of the awakening process, we no longer identify as the separate self or self-concept. This is liberation. It is the freedom or unshakable well-being that we've been seeking. Although we may continue to go through further stages, this concludes the awakening process.